Hannah Kobayashi was more than just a photographer. She was a storyteller. With every click of her camera, she transformed fleeting moments into eternal memories. Born and raised in the tranquil landscapes of Hawaii, Hannah's artistry was deeply inspired by the island's natural beauty. Soaring cliffs, cerulean waves, and vibrant sunsets often found their way into her portfolio. Her work wasn't just admired locally, it had started gaining recognition in art galleries across the Pacific. At 30, Hannah was at a crossroads in her career. She had spent years building her portfolio, traveling across islands, and capturing the intricate details of human connection. But her aspirations reached beyond Hawaii's shores. In the fall of 2024, a prestigious opportunity presented itself, a chance to collaborate with a renowned New York gallery. This project could be her breakthrough, the moment she had worked tirelessly for. Excited yet nervous, she planned her trip meticulously. Her journey would take her from Maui to New York with a layover in Los Angeles. Friends recalled her enthusiasm, sharing how she described the trip as life-changing. Her suitcase packed with camera gear and a heart full of hope, Hannah boarded her flight to Los Angeles on a crisp November morning, unaware that this journey would soon take a sinister turn. What should have been a promising step forward in her career would instead spiral into a mystery that would captivate the nation. Hannah's disappearance would leave her family, friends, and an ever-growing audience desperate for answers. Hannah's flight to Los Angeles was the first step in what was supposed to be a thrilling new chapter. She had planned everything down to the smallest detail: where she'd stay during the layover, what she'd do with the extra time, and the excitement of finally seeing the lights of New York. It was supposed to be an adventure, a chance to take the next step in her career. But as soon as she touched down in LA, the mood began to shift. At first, her family and friends received routine messages from her, nothing unusual, just brief check-ins. Landed in LA, all good, just waiting for the next flight. But those who knew Hannah well noticed a subtle change in her tone. The excitement that usually filled her texts was absent. Where she would normally send multiple messages full of enthusiasm, these were concise, almost distant. Her best friend Laura texted to ask how the layover was going. Hannah's response was quick, but the words seemed clipped and unlike her. Not sure how I feel. Tired. People here seem strange. Laura tried to reassure her, suggesting that perhaps the exhaustion of traveling was weighing on her. But when she asked if Hannah was still looking forward to the next leg of the journey, the reply came back even more unnerving. I don't know anymore. The messages continued throughout the day, each one feeling increasingly out of character. There were no more updates about the city or the plans she had made, just vague, unsettling comments. At one point, she mentioned that she felt off, and in another message, she admitted to being deceived by someone, though she gave no further details. Something was wrong. It was clear to those close to her that the vibrant, optimistic Hannah they knew was slipping into a state of confusion and distress. Her texts, once full of life, now carried a weight of fear. And as her flight to New York approached, those closest to her had no idea how much darker the situation was about to become. It was days before Hannah's disappearance, and the tension in her messages reached a breaking point. Late one evening, her best friend Laura received a text that would haunt her for weeks. The words were simple, yet laden with fear. I've been tricked. I trusted the wrong person. I don't know what to do. Laura immediately replied, pressing for more details, but Hannah's response was cryptic at best. I can't talk about it right now. It's too much. Just please trust me, I'm okay. But Hannah didn't sound okay. Laura knew her best friend well enough to recognize the unease in her words. Hannah had always been the strong one in their friendship, someone who kept her emotions guarded. To hear her speak this openly about feeling betrayed without naming names or explaining what had happened struck a deep chord of worry in Laura's heart. She tried calling Hannah, but the phone went unanswered. It wasn't like her to be unreachable, especially when things seemed off. For days, Laura tried to make sense of the messages. Was it a misunderstanding? Had something happened during her layover that had caused her distress? But each time she reached out, Hannah's responses became more and more distant. Something was wrong, but no one could pinpoint what or why. On the morning of November 10th, 2024, the day Hannah was scheduled to board her connecting flight to New York, something chilling occurred. Her family was expecting a routine update, a simple confirmation that she was on her way to catch the flight that would bring her closer to her big opportunity. But as hours passed, the news that came through was far from what they had hoped. Hannah never made it to her gate at Los Angeles International Airport. Airport authorities confirmed that she had checked in for her flight, but there was no sign of her after that. No one saw her board the plane. No one knew where she had gone. Panic immediately set in. Her family, who had been communicating with her so frequently just days earlier, were now completely in the dark. No one had heard from her. Her phone went unanswered, and she wasn't responding to texts. Friends and relatives began calling each other, trying to piece together where she might have gone. Surveillance footage was reviewed. The last known sighting of Hannah was at a bustling terminal she had checked in, but it was as if she had disappeared into thin air. There were no reports of anyone matching her description leaving the airport. It was as though the last piece of her journey had vanished with her. As the hours turned into days, the uncertainty and fear consumed those closest to her. Where was Hannah? What had happened to her? And what was the meaning behind the strange, unsettling messages she had sent? Her family's worst fears had become a painful reality. Hannah had vanished without a trace. As the days stretched on without any sign of Hannah, a glimmer of hope appeared when investigators uncovered new surveillance footage. The footage, filmed at a busy downtown Los Angeles train station, showed Hannah walking briskly through the crowd. But there was something that immediately struck the investigators and those who saw the footage. She wasn't alone. Standing beside her was an unidentified individual, someone who appeared to be walking with purpose, almost as if they were guiding her through the crowd. The figure was shrouded in shadows, their face obscured by the bustling station, and their identity was completely unknown. The eerie part, Hannah seemed to be in deep conversation with this person, but there was no visible sign of struggle or coercion, just a quiet exchange that left more questions than answers. Who was this person? Was Hannah being followed, or had she willingly met with them? Was she in distress, or was she simply trying to navigate her uncertainty with someone she trusted? The lack of clarity made the scene even more haunting. The footage sent shockwaves through the investigation, leading to a renewed sense of urgency. The person next to Hannah remained a mystery, and every lead pointing toward their identity seemed to vanish into thin air. Was this the key to understanding what happened to Hannah, or was it another dead end in a case that had become increasingly complex? As the investigation dragged on, Hannah's family was consumed by an overwhelming sense of helplessness. Ryan Kobayashi, her father, flew to Los Angeles, determined to join the search and bring his daughter home. The pain of the unknown was unbearable, but he refused to sit idly by while his daughter was missing. Ryan, along with other family members and friends, worked tirelessly to spread the word. Flyers with Hannah's photo and details about her disappearance were plastered across Los Angeles, from busy street corners to quiet coffee shops. Social media campaigns flooded the internet, rallying the public in the hopes of uncovering any leads. Local authorities joined the efforts, but despite their resources, every search turned up empty. Days became weeks, and still there was no sign of Hannah. The train station footage remained the only significant clue, a haunting image of her in the company of someone who might hold the key to unlocking the mystery. But with no answers, frustration and fear mounted with each passing day. Ryan's determination never wavered, but the emotional toll was heavy. His daughter was out there somewhere, and yet the more he searched, the more it felt as though she had disappeared from the world altogether. The case became a painful labyrinth of uncertainty, with every turn leading to more questions. Where was Hannah? And what had happened to her in those crucial hours after her last message? As the search for Hannah stretched on, the weight of the situation began to take a devastating toll on her father, Ryan Kobayashi. A man who had always been steady and strong in the face of hardship, Ryan was visibly shaken by the absence of his daughter. His worry became all-consuming as he worked tirelessly alongside authorities and volunteers, desperately hoping for any sign that Hannah was still alive. But as the days passed, the emotional burden seemed to overwhelm him. Witnesses reported seeing Ryan near Los Angeles International Airport, pacing aimlessly in the hours leading up to his death. He appeared disoriented, his face a mixture of grief and hopelessness. Those who crossed his path that day described him as a shell of the man they once knew lost, consumed by the torment of not knowing where his daughter was or why she had disappeared. A few days later, the unthinkable happened. Ryan was found dead in an apparent suicide, just a short distance from Lax. The discovery stunned everyone who had been following the case, casting an even darker shadow over an already tragic situation. How had things spiraled so far out of control? Had the overwhelming pressure and grief been too much for him to bear? In the midst of the ongoing search for Hannah, Ryan's death raised unsettling questions. Was this the result of his own anguish, or was there something more sinister at play? His passing not only shattered his family, but also sent ripples of sorrow through the public, amplifying the sense of helplessness that had engulfed the case. Ryan's death added a layer of complexity to the search. His desperation to find his daughter now seemed eerily intertwined with the mystery of her disappearance. Ryan Kobayashi's death sent shockwaves through the family, but it also deepened the sense of despair surrounding Hannah's disappearance. In the days following his tragic end, Hannah's family was left reeling, struggling to process not only the ongoing uncertainty about her fate, but also the crushing grief of losing her father in such a heartbreaking way. The public was equally affected. The news of Ryan's death sparked a wave of sympathy and confusion. How could someone so dedicated to finding his daughter succumb to such despair? And was there a connection between his tragic end and the disappearance of his beloved child? As the media covered the case more extensively, the theory that Ryan's death was somehow related to Hannah's disappearance began to circulate. Could his emotional distress have been triggered by new information about Hannah's situation, something he had discovered in the days leading up to his death? Or was it the sheer weight of his own grief and guilt over not being able to protect her that had driven him to such a devastating act? The questions piled up, each one more painful than the last. In the midst of an already tragic situation, the Kobayashi family found themselves trapped in a whirlwind of heartbreak, uncertainty, and suspicion. As the investigation into both Hannah's disappearance and Ryan's death continued, the painful truth lingered. The search for answers was far from over, and the road ahead was filled with even more unanswered questions. As the days turned into weeks, the mystery of Hannah Kobayashi's disappearance captured the nation's attention. The media coverage intensified, turning her case into a high-profile spectacle. News outlets, social media influencers, and amateur sleuths all weighed in with their theories, each one more chilling than the last. Some speculated that Hannah had been abducted by a stranger, lured away under the cover of night by someone with sinister intentions. Others believed it was a planned escape. Maybe she had orchestrated her own disappearance, driven by something deep inside her that nobody could fully understand. The idea that she might have vanished voluntarily seemed almost as unsettling as the possibility that she had been forced into hiding. Public opinion began to split. While some expressed sympathy and support for Hannah's family, others were less compassionate, pointing fingers and suggesting that she was hiding from the world, abandoning her loved ones without a trace. The more the story gained traction, the more speculation grew. Was she running from someone, or was she trying to escape from something far more complicated? The constant media scrutiny only seemed to muddy the waters. Every new theory felt like another layer of mystery, leaving her family to navigate the overwhelming flood of conflicting information. Were the headlines helping, or were they merely fueling the fire of confusion? As the investigation into Hannah's disappearance deepened, detectives began to unearth troubling details about her life in the days leading up to her vanishing. Friends and family had described her as vibrant, successful, and eager to take her career to the next level. But the more they learned, the clearer it became that something or someone had unsettled her in a profound way. It was during conversations with those closest to her that a painful piece of her recent past emerged. Hannah had been involved in a romantic relationship that, by all accounts, had ended tragically. Her friends spoke of her being deeply hurt by the breakup, though no one knew the full extent of the emotional toll it had taken on her. Some described how, in the months leading up to her disappearance, Hannah had confided that she felt betrayed by someone she had trusted deeply, a person she had once believed in, someone she thought she would spend her life with. Could this betrayal have played a role in her decision to vanish? Was it possible that the emotional wounds from the failed relationship, combined with her growing fear and uncertainty, led her to abandon everything she knew, even her dreams? The more investigators learned, the more they began to question whether Hannah's disappearance was tied to something much more personal than anyone could have imagined. Was she fleeing from heartbreak, or was there more to the story, some hidden secret that could explain why she had felt so desperate to escape? With each passing lead, the case grew more complicated, and the shadows of her past began to loom larger. As the weeks dragged on without any new leads, the investigation into Hannah Kobayashi's disappearance grew quieter. The initial burst of media attention and public concern began to fade, and the hope of finding her seemed to dim with each passing day. The only solid clue left was the haunting surveillance footage from the downtown Los Angeles train station, images of Hannah in the company of an unidentified individual. But despite numerous attempts to track down the mysterious person, they remained an enigma. Detectives combed through the footage again and again, hoping to find a small detail that would lead them to a breakthrough. But nothing new came to light. The identity of the person walking alongside her remained elusive, and the trail they had once followed so eagerly seemed to slip further and further away. Family and friends, once filled with hope, now found themselves grappling with a growing sense of despair. The case that had once seemed full of promise was now a tangled web of dead ends. It was as if Hannah had vanished into thin air, and with each passing day, the world moved on, the case becoming just another cold mystery in a sea of unsolved disappearances. But even as public interest waned, those closest to Hannah refused to give up. They continued to search for answers, clinging to the hope that somewhere, somehow, a new lead would emerge. Just as it seemed that all was lost, a breakthrough came, an unexpected glimmer of hope in the otherwise darkened investigation. A tip from an anonymous source led authorities to a small town in Mexico where a woman matching Hannah's description had been seen. The tipster was vague, but the details were enough to ignite a renewed sense of urgency. Hannah's family, who had been waiting for any news, were cautiously optimistic. Could this be the break they had been hoping for? Or was it another dead end, a false hope like so many before it? Within hours of receiving the tip, law enforcement officials sprang into action. A task force was quickly assembled, and a team of investigators was sent to Mexico to follow up on the lead. It was a risky move. Mexico's vast terrain and the potential for misinformation made it an uncertain operation, but the urgency of the situation couldn't be denied. If this was indeed Hannah, it would mark a turning point in the case. As the investigation in Mexico ramped up, the tension in the air was palpable. Family members who had been left to wonder about Hannah's fate for so long could only wait, holding their breath for what might come next. Would this tip lead to answers, or would it only bring more questions, deepening the mystery even further? The moment came unexpectedly. A phone call to Hannah's family shattered the suffocating silence they had been living in for weeks. Hannah had been found alive. She had been located in a small, remote town in Mexico, far from the bustling streets of Los Angeles where she had last been seen. When authorities found her, she appeared physically unharmed, but something about her was unsettling. She didn't react with joy or relief as one might expect after being lost for so long. Instead, her demeanor was cold, distant. The bright, adventurous young woman who had left Hawaii for her trip was now a stranger, someone who seemed to have retreated into herself. Her first words to the authorities were a quiet, almost pleading request: "Please don't make me go back." This brief sentence was enough to send shockwaves through the investigators and Hannah's family. What did she mean? Was she afraid to return home, or was there something else keeping her from reconnecting with those who loved her? Hannah's family, desperately yearning for answers, could only stand by as they waited to understand the full scope of her emotional state. She was alive, but the person who had returned to them was a shadow of the vibrant woman they had once known. In the days following her discovery, law enforcement conducted an interview with Hannah, hoping to uncover the truth behind her disappearance. What they learned only deepened the mystery and the growing sense of unease. Hannah told authorities she had no idea that her disappearance had triggered such a massive nationwide search. She described herself as feeling lost, overwhelmed by the weight of an emotional burden she couldn't articulate. But there was more: a disturbing revelation that would leave everyone questioning what had really happened during the weeks she had gone missing. She spoke of being manipulated by someone she had trusted, someone who had played a significant role in her decision to disappear. Though she refused to name the person, her words hinted at a betrayal so deep it had shattered her sense of reality. In her account, she described how this person had gained her trust, only to deceive her in ways that left her vulnerable and confused. "I didn't know who to trust anymore," Hannah explained softly, her voice laced with a haunting sense of helplessness. "I felt like everything around me was falling apart. I couldn't think clearly. Everything felt like a lie." These revelations sent ripples through the investigation. Who was this person? Why had they manipulated her? And what had they done to her in the days leading up to her disappearance? The more Hannah spoke, the more questions arose, and the truth seemed to slip further out of reach. But one thing became clear: the woman who had returned from Mexico was not the same as the one who had boarded a flight to New York weeks earlier. What had happened in the interim? Was it trauma, manipulation, or something else entirely? The case that had already confounded investigators and the public now seemed even more mysterious than before. Hannah's return to the United States should have been a moment of reunion and relief for her family, but it was far from the closure they had hoped for. As the days passed following her discovery, the unanswered questions piled up. The most glaring of them all was her refusal to address her father's tragic death. Ryan Kobayashi's suicide had sent shockwaves through the family, and many expected Hannah to mourn him, to express the pain of losing the man who had traveled across the country in search of her. But instead, she remained disturbingly silent. When questioned about her father's death by investigators and family members, Hannah simply did not respond. There were no tears, no mention of the devastation it had caused her family, and no acknowledgement of the profound loss. This absence of any emotional reaction led to speculation about Hannah's mental state. Was she in denial? Or was she emotionally detached, too traumatized by her own experience to process the grief of her father's death? Her silence left her family and loved ones reeling, unsure of how to reach her, unsure of whether she was even capable of processing the magnitude of what had transpired. Her refusal to address Ryan's death only deepened the mystery surrounding her disappearance. Was her silence a sign of deep emotional turmoil that she couldn't bring herself to confront, or was there something more troubling at the root of her behavior? As the investigation progressed and more details about Hannah's return came to light, mental health experts began to weigh in on her behavior. They observed signs of severe emotional distress that were impossible to ignore. Experts noted that her detachment, confusion, and cryptic messages were not simply the result of being lost or disoriented. They pointed to a deeper, more complex struggle. Could Hannah have been suffering from a mental health crisis that had been building for months? Experts suggested that her behavior in the days leading up to her disappearance, including her fearful and confused messages to friends and family, might have been cries for help that went unheard or misunderstood. Hannah had been acting out of character, a stark contrast to the confident, independent woman people knew her to be. One theory was that Hannah might have been grappling with anxiety, depression, or even a breakdown of her own mental state. Her cryptic texts to her best friend expressing feelings of being tricked and unsure of what to do suggested a person in extreme emotional distress, someone who felt completely out of control. Her abrupt disappearance, the sudden shift in her demeanor, and the lack of response to family's desperate attempts to contact her all painted a picture of a woman overwhelmed by forces beyond her ability to cope. While investigators continued to focus on the more tangible aspects of her case, the mysterious figure in the train station footage, the financial betrayal she hinted at, mental health experts began to see the full complexity of Hannah's actions. The reality seemed far more tragic than anyone had imagined. Hannah may have been struggling in ways that were invisible to those around her. Was her disappearance a result of being pushed to a breaking point? Had her emotional struggles spiraled out of control, leading her to take drastic actions that she could no longer control? And if so, had anyone been able to recognize the signs of her silent battle before it was too late? Hannah's case quickly became a media sensation, and with it came the inevitable debate about the role the press plays in high-profile disappearances. The initial media coverage was frantic, with every new development, whether big or small, fueling the 24-hour news cycle. Social media platforms buzzed with updates, theories, and questions from the public, all eager for answers. In some ways, the media's attention helped spread the word, keeping the search for Hannah alive and bringing fresh eyes to the investigation. But as the case evolved, the media's relentless focus on every detail of Hannah's life seemed to take a toll on her recovery. Some praised the publicity for keeping the case at the forefront and keeping pressure on authorities to continue their search. But others questioned whether the constant barrage of news stories, speculation, and public scrutiny had intensified the emotional distress she was already experiencing. Mental health professionals warned that the intense media spotlight could have exacerbated Hannah's trauma, making it harder for her to heal. The pressure to share her side of the story, the invasion of her privacy, and the constant public fascination with her disappearance may have only deepened her sense of isolation. Was she running from the media just as much as she was from her own life? As Hannah retreated further into herself, refusing to speak about the details of her ordeal or even acknowledge her father's death, many began to question whether the media's involvement had ultimately hindered her ability to process her emotions. In the race for answers, had the press unknowingly contributed to her pain rather than offering the healing space she so desperately needed? Despite Hannah's return and the initial hopes for clarity, the case remained shrouded in mystery, with more questions than answers. What had truly happened during the days and weeks she spent missing? The footage of Hannah at the Los Angeles train station, walking alongside an unidentified individual, was the most compelling clue in the investigation. yet it only led to more confusion. Who was this person? Why was Hannah with them? And what did their presence signify? Investigators were no closer to identifying the figure than they had been at the beginning. Was the person a friend, a stranger, or someone with a darker agenda? Equally perplexing was Hannah's decision to flee to Mexico. Why had she chosen to disappear there, far from the people who cared about her? The investigators' first assumption was that she had been trying to escape, but from what exactly? Was she running from the betrayal she had hinted at, or had something or someone forced her to go into hiding? Perhaps most chilling of all was the emotional state in which Hannah had returned. Her detachment from the situation, her refusal to speak about her father's tragic death, and her cryptic claims of being manipulated pointed to an unresolved inner turmoil that no one could fully understand. What had happened to her during the time she was missing, and how had it changed her? As the case continued to unfold, the unanswered questions seemed only to multiply. The deeper investigators dug, the less they understood. And as the public followed the twists and turns of the investigation, they were left grappling with the haunting reality. Some mysteries, no matter how deeply we search, may never be solved. Hannah Kobayashi's disappearance and the tragic death of her father Ryan created a ripple effect that stretched far beyond her immediate family. For those who loved her, the wounds were deep and complex. The confusion, grief, and unanswered questions left a trail of heartbreak that would take years to heal, if at all. For Ryan's family, his sudden death under such tragic circumstances was an unbearable wound. Ryan had been a pillar of strength for Hannah, a devoted father whose search for his daughter had consumed him. But his own pain and the emotional toll of losing her, compounded by his inability to bring her home, led to a breakdown that many could never have predicted. His passing, without explanation, left a scar on everyone who had witnessed his suffering. For the public, Hannah's story was a chilling reminder of the unseen struggles that individuals face. It highlighted how personal battles, mental health crises, broken relationships, and emotional turmoil can ripple through lives in ways that leave no visible scars but create deep, lasting damage. What had seemed like an ordinary woman with big dreams and a bright future was, in truth, someone wrestling with invisible demons. The case served as a painful reminder of the fragility of the human condition. It wasn't just about a disappearance. It was about a father's love, a daughter's hidden pain, and the complexities of how people sometimes cope in ways that others can't understand. As the months passed, the ripples of Hannah's story continued to echo through the lives of those who were closest to her, forever marked by the mystery that surrounded her and the unanswered questions that remained. Though Hannah expressed a deep desire for privacy and a wish to move on from the traumatic events that had captured the nation's attention, her case remains a haunting enigma. The unanswered questions still linger in the minds of those who followed her story, those who tried to piece together the fractured details of her disappearance. Hannah's return, though a relief, did little to bring clarity. The silence surrounding her father's death, her own emotional withdrawal, and the cryptic nature of her statements have left the case riddled with more mystery than answers. What truly happened during those weeks when she vanished? What was the betrayal that drove her to flee? Who was the person in the train station with her, and why did she choose to disappear in Mexico? As we reflect on her story, we are left with one undeniable question. How much do we really know about the people we love? Behind every smile, behind every message, there could be a world of struggles that we may never see. Hannah's case forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that no matter how close we are to someone, there may be parts of their lives that remain forever out of reach. The case may have faded from headlines, but for those who followed her story, the questions still remain. Hannah's journey may have come to a close, but the echoes of her struggle will linger, a stark reminder of the fragility of the human experience and the hidden battles that shape the lives of those around us.